There is a difference between a belief you chose and a belief that was chosen for you. Hi, I'm Dr. Lori Stevick Rust. 40 years of sitting with people through their hardest moments has taught me one thing. Our power lives in our courage to be real. This is where we stop pretending and we find our way back to ourselves. I'm glad you're here. Now pull up a chair. This is Becoming Real. Raise your hand if you've said this at least once this week, or maybe even 10 times in a single day. How can they possibly think like that? How many of you are navigating tension in your family, in your friendships right now, and finding yourself on complete opposite sides of, well, really the world? Based on what I hear from individuals and families in my therapy practice, and honestly from my own life and experiences with people, I know I am willing to bet it's most of you. And that is part of what makes this so painful. It's not only that we disagree, because that can actually be healthy in certain circumstances. It's that we can hear the same words, watch the same events, and come away with completely different ideas about what is true. And at some point, it stops feeling like a simple difference of opinion and starts to feel like we are not even living inside the same reality. And when that happens, it's very easy to reach for a quick explanation. We might tell ourselves that, well, those people are irrational, uninformed, or just not thinking clearly. And yes, sometimes that is part of it. Sometimes people are reckless with facts intentionally. And sometimes they are just simply repeating things that they have not really examined. But psychology tells us something deeper is actually going on. And I think that it matters. Because if we miss that deeper part, we will keep asking the question without ever really finding a better way forward. As human beings, we do not usually come to our beliefs in the nice, neat, easy, rational way that we like to imagine. And I know we really do want to believe that first we gather the facts, then we weigh the evidence, and finally we arrive at a thoughtful conclusion. It is certainly a flattering story that we tell ourselves, but it's often not quite true. And this is where the research helps us, because psychology and neuroscience paint a messier and much more humbling picture about our brain. That beautiful, miraculous 3-pound organ that sits between our ears is not just a thinking machine. It's also a prediction machine. It is constantly scanning for patterns, looking for signs of safety or threat, and making fast meaning out of what it sees based on what it has already learned. Now, what that means is we're not moving through the world as neutral observers, even though we would like to think we are. We bring our history with us. We bring our fear with us. We bring old loyalties, old wounds, old hopes, old assumptions, and stories we've already learned to trust or mistrust. So often, something will hit us emotionally before we ever think it through clearly. And if we're honest, most of us know exactly what that feels like. We can feel threatened or relieved or validated or afraid. And then, and only then, does our thinking brain start trying to make sense of what we're actually feeling. I mean, think about that for a minute. Most of the time, we do not think our way into a belief. Instead, we feel our way there first, and then we explain it to ourselves. And I think once we understand that, a lot of what feels so confusing right now starts to make more sense about ourselves and about each other. For example, if I already feel uneasy about what is happening in our world, and then I hear someone offer a very simple explanation for why I feel so unsettled, that message can stick with me before I have ever really examined it for myself. If I already feel disconnected and scared, and someone tells me exactly who is to blame, that hits at a deeper level more than logic. If I already feel lonely and a group offers me a place for belonging, for certainty, and the most important one, a shared enemy, That can feel powerful before I have even asked whether what they are saying is true or even fits in my own beliefs and values. You can see how easy it is for us to get caught up in our emotions, while the more rational, reasoned part of our brain takes time to catch up. And that is where things start to get complicated. We experience the belief as if we've already reasoned our way into it, when often we are pulled there emotionally long before we ever explained it to ourselves. And once something feels like relief, the mind becomes very good at defending it and holding on to it. I mean, of course it does. If an idea or a belief brings us relief, why would we want to hold tight to it? Even if it's not actually factual or correct. And somewhere deep inside, we know that. You can see this even outside of politics. Maybe you can relate to a time when you noticed that something felt off in your body long before you were ready to fully face it. Maybe it's the fatigue that lingers, the pain that keeps returning, the symptoms that do not quite add up. But because the possibility of something being really wrong feels frightening, the mind might soften it and downplay it and sound more like, I'm just run down. It's probably stress. I don't need to make a big deal about it. Sometimes the mind tries to protect us from a truth that feels way too hard to face. And I think that matters because we do this in all kinds of ways. Not because we're stupid, but because this is part of being human. And that is really humbling because most of us are not nearly as objective as we like to think. We're shaped by emotions, fear, identity, and belonging far more than we realize. And that is part of why propaganda works. So when I say propaganda, I don't mean just big dramatic lies, although those can certainly be part of it. Propaganda is the deliberate manipulation of information and stories to shape what we think, what we feel, and what we believe, usually without us realizing that it's actually happening. And here's how it works. It starts out with repetition. Say something over and over and over until we all start taking it in as if it's fact, even if it's a lie or distortion of facts or truth. Remember, our brain is a predictive machine, and it's looking for patterns and frequency. Then it relies on emotional hooks that remind us what to fear and who to blame. You know, that common enemy that we keep hearing about. And finally, through offering us selective truths that intentionally leave out the pieces that would give us a fuller picture of the situation and help us think for ourselves. And here's why that matters. Attention shapes experiences more than we realize. If someone can shape what we keep noticing, what we keep hearing repeated, and what we are emotionally prepared to see, they can begin to shape what feels true to us. They didn't always have to give us a careful argument. A lot of the time, they just have to keep stirring us up enough, frightening us enough, making us feel certain enough that we can then stop thinking deeply. I mean, let's be honest, that's a whole lot easier. And this is where fear becomes so powerful. Propaganda leans heavily on repetition, fear, outrage, and simplification because it often gets to us before we have time to really think about it. We feel it in our body first, that jolt of anger, a rush of fear, that sense of being on edge. And once that happens, reflections and deeper thinking gets harder. Fear narrows us. It makes certainty much more appealing. Let me say that again. Fear narrows our focus and makes us want to grab onto anything that feels certain. It makes simple stories feel safer than complicated ones. So if we already feel overwhelmed or invisible or frightened about the future or angry and unable to name exactly why, and then along comes a message that says, here's the problem, here's who caused it, here's who's dangerous, here's where you belong, that message can feel true before we have ever allowed our brain to fully examine it. Not because it's true, but because it's relieving. And I think that is one of the hardest truths in this whole conversation. False beliefs do not spread only because people are uninformed. They also spread because they can soothe something in us. They can organize our pain. They can make chaos feel more orderly. They can give fear a target. They can make someone feel seen. They can make someone feel less alone. And when a belief starts doing that kind of emotional work for us, facts alone often do not change it. And that is where cognitive dissonance comes in. Now, cognitive dissonance is the discomfort we feel when two things do not fit together. When two things do not fit together. For example, if I think of myself as a good, thoughtful, informed person, and then I'm confronted with evidence that I may have trusted something misleading, defended something false, or supported something harmful, that tension is painful. And when people feel that pain, they do not always move towards truth. A lot of the time, they move towards relief. So they rationalize. They explain it away. They attack the source. They look for some version of the story that allows them to remain who they believe themselves to be and think the way that they have been thinking. From the outside, that can look maddening, I know. But from the inside, it often feels like self-protection. If changing your mind feels like it will cost you your identity, your pride, your relationships, your community, or even your sense of stability, then holding on to that belief can feel safer than facing what is true. And often, underneath all of it, underneath the defensiveness, the rationalizing, the certainty, is something even more basic than pride. It's belonging. And here's what I mean by that. We do not form our beliefs alone. We form them inside families, communities, churches, political tribes, media worlds, and social circles. If changing your mind means risking rejection, shame, conflict, or distance from the people whom you've been most identified with, that's not a small thing. And for many of us, that cost feels enormous. So we stay with our belief. We repeat the language. We harden and stand firm in our certainty. And eventually, what may once have been handed to us begins to feel like, yep, our own independent thought. And that brings us to another important point. Repetition matters. What is repeated begins to feel familiar, and what feels familiar can begin to feel true. Not because it is true, but because it no longer feels strange. Propaganda understands that. Say it often enough, make it simple enough, load it with enough emotion, and before long, people start repeating it as if it is just such obvious truths. And I think that also helps explain why these conversations can feel so impossible, especially when the person across from us is someone we love. When someone you love believes something that feels detached from reality, your reality, you are rarely just debating facts. You are often brushing up against fear, identity, shame, belonging, and the mind's deep need to protect itself. This is why evidence alone often does not seem to make a difference. It's not because facts do not matter. It's because facts are up against something far more personal than information. Now, I've used this visual with many of my own clients. It's Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain, and I'm going to describe it to you here. But if you are more of a visual person like I am, I've created a short video demonstrating it, and I'll link that for you here in the show notes. Okay, I want you to do something right now. Make a fist right now and hold it up. That fist is your brain. Your wrist and the base of your hand, that's your brainstem. The place where your breathing, your heart rate, your basic survival goes on. It's automatic. We don't even have to think about that. The brain is taking care of it. Now tuck your thumb inside your palm. This is what we call your limbic system, the emotional part of the brain, the part that quickly decides whether something feels threatening. Think of it maybe as the fight or flight response. This happens automatically. We don't have a whole lot of control. We're stuck in this emotional loop before we ever have a chance to sort through it. It's automatic. Now hold your fingers down over your thumb. Your fingers are what we call your prefrontal cortex, your higher thinking brain, the place for reasoning, perspective, empathy, judgment, that part that helps you pause and make sense of what this emotional feeling is. When everything is working together, the whole fist works together. You feel something, you process it, and then you can respond more wisely. But here's what happens when we get triggered by fear or by emotions that just flood us. Our fingers fly open. This is what Dr. Siegel calls flipping your lid. Your higher thinking brain is no longer fully connected. And now the more reactive parts of your brain are simply running the show. You feel something, you react. You feel something, you react. Your perspective shrinks, reasoning gets harder, everything speeds up, and emotions just keep running in a loop. That's our biology. When the brain senses threat, it moves fast. It prioritizes survival over reflection. And what that means, it can react to emotional threat to the body in ways that are not all that different from physical danger. And here's the part that most people miss. You usually can't think your way back first. You have to help your body settle enough for your thinking brain to come back online. This might require a pause, a slow breath, stepping away from a situation, being around other people who ground you, taking a little space. That is often when we start to think more clearly again. Once that emotional loop has settled and our body, our nervous system, is back being regulated. And I'm sharing all of this with you right now because I think the more we understand how this works in ourselves and in the world around us, the harder it becomes to be swept away by it. So instead of staying stuck in the question of how others could possibly think the way they do, maybe we can start asking ourselves what we can actually do with our own minds. So what do we do with all of this? First, we slow the process down. Propaganda loves speed. Emotional reactivity loves speed. The thinking area of our brain needs more time. So if something instantly makes you furious, terrified, vindicated, or deeply certain, that should be your cue to pause and not double down. Not because the message is automatically false, but because experiencing a strong emotion is often the moment we most need the thinking brain back online. And then we have to name what is happening inside of us. I say this probably 100 times a day, it feels like. If we don't know what the emotion is, how are we going to be able to respond and react to it? Now, this may seem obvious, but when emotions flood us, it's hard to know what we are actually experiencing. Am I scared right now? Am I angry? Do I feel ashamed? Am I embarrassed? Do I feel relieved by this explanation? Do I want this to be true because it gives me someone to blame? Once we name the feeling and understand the thought behind it, we're less likely to be run by it. But this takes a willingness to consciously look at ourselves. Once we pause and name what we are feeling, we're in a much better position to ask better questions. Not just, is this true? But also, why does this feel so satisfying for me to believe it? What in me is getting hooked right now into this story? Is this expanding my thinking or narrowing it? And who benefits if I stay reactive? Who benefits if I stay emotional? By giving our nervous system a chance to settle, we put ourselves back in control. Because when we're flooded with emotions, we often confuse that intensity with truth. Again, when we are flooded with these emotions, we often confuse that intensity with truth. And then finally, we have to be willing to tolerate complexity. I know, ugh, we don't really love complexity. We want simplicity. And propaganda knows that. So it offers us a false sense of certainty. It allows us to thrive on simple stories, absolute villains, and emotional clarity. But real thinking can tolerate complexity. Higher level thinking can tolerate complexity. Real thinking can say, I need more than one source. I need context. I need to know what is being left out. I need to be careful about what I am too quick to believe. And I think we also need enough humility to admit that none of us is above this. The moment we believe that only other people are influenceable is usually the moment we become more influenceable ourselves. So if you find yourself in cognitive dissonance, even if you don't call it that, and even if you do not realize that is what is happening, pay attention to the urge to get rigid fast. You know that feeling. Maybe someone shares something that contradicts what you have been believing, and instead of getting curious, you feel yourself shutting down or getting defensive or suddenly needing to discredit the source of where it came from. That's the urge. That's the signal. Pay attention to the urge to defend yourself before you reflect. Pay attention to the part of you that wants relief more than the truth. And let's be honest, we're just humans, so that happens to most of us. Remember, just because something feels true doesn't mean it is. Our feelings are real, but they're not always accurate. We can feel completely certain and still be wrong. We can feel relieved and still be misled. And the most comforting answer is not always the honest one. Understanding all this does not make the harm any less real. The damage that comes from false beliefs, from division, from being shaped without knowing it, that's real and it matters. But it does change the question. Not only how can they think like that, but also, what if I'm doing the same thing and just can't see it for myself? That may not be the most satisfying question, but I do think it is the more honest one, and maybe the more useful one too. Because becoming real doesn't mean doubting everything you believe or letting go of what matters most to you. This is about making sure that what we believe is actually ours, that it came from somewhere real inside of us, that it was examined, that it was chosen, not handed to us by fear or repetition or the need to belong somewhere. For me, that's part of what it means to become more real. Some things are true. Some values are worth holding on to and worth protecting. And sometimes, yes, putting distance between yourself and someone whose values feel truly harmful might be the right thing to do. That is a real and sometimes necessary choice. And even that choice deserves to come from somewhere clear inside of you, not from fear, not from what you were told to feel, not from the noise, but from you. It means not handing our mind over so easily. It means not letting fear do all of our thinking. It means questioning what feels immediately satisfying to believe. It means protecting our capacity for reflections in a world that keeps rewarding reactions. So maybe this is the work now, to notice when fear is taking over, to slow down before certainty takes over, and to make enough room for the wiser part of our brain to come back online. Because we are this divided in part because too often we are letting emotions lead and then asking reflection to catch up. And that's a dangerous way to live. In a world constantly trying to shape our attention, stir our fear, and tell us what to believe, becoming real may mean protecting our mind well enough that we can still recognize truth. Because there is a difference between a belief that you chose and a belief that was chosen for you. Thank you for being here with me today. I'm happy we're on this journey together. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about, maybe a moment of pause, a little insight, or something you can carry into your own life. To stay connected, follow Becoming Real. Share it with someone who may also need it. And if you have a minute and you feel kind, please leave a review. It helps more people find the show. And if you want to go deeper than this podcast can take us on these and other topics, consider joining our community where the real conversation continues at the link in the show notes below. Until next time, this is Becoming Real.